Good morning. Happy Friday. Welcome back once again to another episode of Maker That Money, the podcast where we talk about turning your hobby into your jobby. With me, as always, my good partner in crime, my friend, my rock, Mr. Andrew Mayhall
Your
of 3D
rock.
Gloop, my rock, my sounding board, you get to
I love
listen to
it.
me complain about everything. But most of all, my friend and my colleague, Andrew, how are you this week? How did this week go? I know it's been busy ramping up for ERF, which is coming up in a couple
Yes.
of weeks. We're excited about that. That's the East Coast Rap Festival. For anybody listening doesn't know what ERF is, also the place we live. But how are you doing?
I am doing great. I can't wait for Earth to actually be here, but also I think more so wait for it to be over.
You're already talking about the end of Earth before Earth has even started. Yeah, no, I know. We get this frothy, these just like work up fever, trying to get into the
Yep.
mode for trade show time and season and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
we're doing Earth, right? And then we're going to be at the Orlando Maker Faire less than a month later.
right.
So
Well,
yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy.
let me ask you this: how much of that work are you able to like? Are you going to have a? You're not doing like a big booth in the same fashion, are you?
Yeah, so
Oh,
we
you
do.
are.
We still kind of set up the same sort of thing down at Orlando. It's one of those things where we've gone to like pretty much every maker fair that we could. But yeah, it's a fun time. So we kind of borrow all of the work that we do for Earth and Murph. Those are the big shows for us, and then we'll just kind of set up the same thing down there. So it's a lot easier, but it's still within a month later. We're going to another trade show halfway across the country.
Never ending. It seems like there's a season to it, right? Where
Yeah.
the during the summer season and stuff. I don't know. I guess there's trade shows year round and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's as a small business entrepreneur, it's always an interesting trying to strike that balance of getting out, interacting,
Mhm.
networking. There's tons of value in it, but obviously it's just one of many things that we need
Yep.
to do. One of many hats we need to wear, and it's very intensive, right? Labor intensive to prep.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
because unlike when you can just hide at home in your dirty shop and nobody comes and sees it, it's like you're trying to put your best foot forward and present, the
Yep.
best. You're trying to
Well,
launch a new
and we
product
always we
often.
always
Yeah,
try and one up the previous show, right?
yeah.
We are
What is
always
that?
trying to
Right? Like I showed that off
so
last time. I got to have something better to show this time.
yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then we never plan long, far enough ahead where it's always a crunch time right before it. So, I'm feeling under the pressure, but overall I'm good.
Yeah. I always say it's like I always wait till the last minute because all that's left ever feels like is the last minute, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah. Greetings to everybody joining us in the chat. We record Maker That Money every Friday at 9 a.m. on YouTube. So if you want to interact with us on the chat, feed us questions, feed us comments, you're welcome to do so. Good to see some familiar faces, some familiar avatars and handles and stuff in
Yeah.
the chat. Good international crowd again this morning, this evening, depending on where you're from. But awesome. We got. There's a feisty crowd this morning. Always a feisty
Yes, we
crowd in the
do.
chat. But greetings, Krusty at Practical Printing. Liz, good to see you. Nathan. Fotis Mint, he's going to be at ERF. He's
Oh yeah.
you guys got to go check out Fotis' stuff. He's like a prolific 3D modeler, making just endless streams of epic models. He's actually going to be hanging out with me for a little bit, or and us, because we kind of share
Oh yeah.
an adjoining
Yeah.
booth space. But he's going to be signing. We're gonna have our
Oh
first
boy.
signing event, signing his models at Earth. We're very excited for that, and we haven't really pushed out the official announcement, even though I've kind of teased it here and there. But good opportunity.
That's
Anybody watching,
awesome.
coming to Earth, bring your Fotis Mint models and get the man himself to sign it for you,
Awesome.
which will increase the value of that model by at least 300 times, I'm told. At least,
Okay. At least.
right. When you look at the, we need like a Beckett's guy. You remember, you ever collect baseball cards or any of that stuff where it was like you could see the
I
value
really wasn't into that, but yeah, I
of
know
your
what you're talking
collectibles?
about.
Yeah. So you look it up and you say a Photos Mint, original is worth
Hmm.
X amount. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Listen, today on the pod, I want to talk about a phenomenon that I'm encountering and you're encountering, and I think we all
Oh,
encounter
yes.
at some extent as a small business, especially as a startup, as a bootstrapped environment where your
Mm-hmm.
resources are limited, especially. But it's something that I affectionately like to call the pit, or the divide, or
Okay.
the chasm, or I've used a number of different terms for it, and maybe you guys call it something different in your lives. If
Mm-hmm.
you're out there, let us know once I define it here for you, like if you have ever tried to define this. But the pit to me is the are these gaps that exist between where you are and where you want to be, and they
Okay.
oftentimes represent what feel like very daunting challenges to get to what you would consider the next level. So, for example, there's a guy because I think there's a number of business scenarios where this pit exists. One of the ones I think we've talked about before is in the let's just talk about in the world of like purchasing. And we talked about the
Mm-hmm.
difference between making it ourselves, we're makers, we like to make everything ourselves,
Sure.
and
Okay.
going out to
Mm-hmm.
buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you talked about this last week when you started trying to get pricing
Yep.
to want to
Yes.
buy in
Absolutely.
bulk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're not talking about a number that is enticing enough for a third party vendor, to get out of bed for, like
Yep.
they won't even give you the time of day, right?
Yep.
And so you're confronted with this odd space where you're bigger than where you have time. You know that it's not going to be effective use of your time to do this yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then
Yep.
to be able to purchase at the scale, at the
Mm-hmm.
volume that you need for it to be like really, beneficial cost reduction feels like, oftentimes 30,000 units, 50,000 units.
Oh yeah.
And you don't want to
It's insane.
commit to that kind of
Mm-hmm.
amount because you have no idea how long it's going to take you to sell those. You might make a change and all this stuff. And so, you know, I oftentimes say it feels like we hear fortune favors the bold, but fortune favors like the successful in a lot of this in the case where it's like the people that benefit most from cost of scale are the ones that need it the least, right? It's like I don't want to say need it the least. You're always happy
Yeah.
to be able to bring your costs down. But
Yep.
being able to bring your cost down effectively is a luxury of a certain degree of success. And when you're in the mode
Absolutely.
where
Yeah.
every penny counts and you really want that bulk discount, and you're really trying to
Mm-hmm.
strive for it, by the
Yes.
time you can afford to commit to 100,000 units of something, it's not quite as painful of a decision. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I look at that
Absolutely.
and I feel like it's a giant pit, right? Because I'm like, how am I
Yep.
going to get from the 5,000, which is a lot to me? Like, if you sit down and
Mm-hmm.
package 5,000 of anything or whatever, you realize that's a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
something. We think,
Yep.
like it's not a big deal. No, it takes a lot of time, even if it's a simple thing like putting screws
Mm-hmm.
in a bag.
Yep.
Right. So how do I get from 5,000 to 50,000 or, 10x or 100x or whatever to the point
Yes.
where we're talking about fractions of a penny versus, a dime or 20 cents a piece, like cuz it's
Sure.
that economy of scale feels massive, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's one example of the pit. Have you come across others that you can think of that you would define as like that chasm between where you are and where you want to be?
I mean, yeah, one of those interesting things is when we started Gloop, we wanted to have like full automated production, automated bottling lines because we knew it would drive the costs down.
Right.
But we couldn't go out the gate with that because those machines are like $80,000. And
Capital
so
expenditure for
like
sure.
what do we do as as kind of a scrappy entrepreneur is we try and figure out how to imitate that as little as possible or as close as possible with as little cash as possible.
Right.
And I remember sharing this on the podcast a while ago, like how we were cutting our labels by hand because ordering 10,000 labels was just too expensive for us at the moment, like
Right.
when we first started. And so
Right.
we'd print them out on paper, on like vinyl label paper, and we'd cut them by hand. So I think that's more of like an operational thing. You were kind of hinting on that. It's like, okay, well, like instead of purchasing, 5,000 widgets from someone else, it's like, okay, well, we're going to do it ourselves and we're going to make it as to the point where we can get it to cheap enough where it's affordable. But
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
with our bottling system, like we would bottle everything by hand. We would then label the bottles by hand, and there's a
Absolutely.
certain cost to that. And you know, having to figure out what could we do to get to having that completely automated.
Right. And a lot of times the challenge is we get so caught up in just needing to get it done that we don't actually sit down and price out what the true cost is. We've talked about this plenty of time too, because we do not, especially as makers, one of the, if there were 7 deadly sins of makers, the first one or one of the top ones is we do not value
Mhm.
our time properly in terms of like on a
Yes.
true business case, right? Like in terms of like what's the opportunity cost of what you should really be spending your time doing and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And eh, a lot of times maybe we do and we sit down and say fundamentally this is not a good use of my time, but it does not
Mhm.
mean that I can afford to pay somebody else yet either, right? So
Exactly.
it's so easy for us to be like, well, this isn't what I should be doing, but it doesn't mean
Mhm.
there's something to act on.
Yeah.
So we're constantly balancing that stuff. One of the other
Mhm.
examples that I feel like I come across of the pit, the divide. The reason I stole the pit, by the way, for those of you who haven't, there's this I think it was released on Apple TV or whatever, but it was a movie called Greyhound, but with Tom Hanks in it. Did you ever see it? It's about World War II
I don't think so.
convoy
Okay.
crossing, and they call the area in the mid-Atlantic where they don't have air cover and are most vulnerable to U-boats back in World War II. They called that the pit, the black
Okay.
pit, because
Okay.
there was a spot like in the midway where they couldn't have air cover on either side, which made them most susceptible. And I feel like that this pit to me is like one of the most fraught areas, right? Where it feels
Sure.
like I
Okay.
want to grow, but if I'm going to commit to crossing this pit, it feels more risky than when I'm just doing my little incremental approaches closer to shore. I guess I don't know.
Sure.
So I
Sure.
kind of stole it from that. I love that movie. I always put that on. Highly recommend if you have a chance. If you're into World War II movies and stuff like that, that's kind of where I stole it from. But one of the other
Okay.
examples I was going to give was the moving out of your garage, getting into your own space at first, right?
Mhm.
Because
Okay, yes.
going from basically having no rent, let's just call it, I mean,
Mhm.
you and for tax purposes you can argue you can apportion portion of your
Mhm.
rent or your mortgage toward a business expense, but for the most part we'll call it you needed to have a place to live anyway. You're working out of your garage, you have zero
Yep.
rent, you have to have utilities, you have your internet, you have your gas and water and electricity and all
Yep.
of that stuff there. And then that leap to having another place and a massive just overhead for a facility feels very
Mhm.
daunting, right? I mean, a lot of
Yes.
you guys are probably in that space now.
That's something we're going through right now,
Yeah.
like literally right now. Yeah.
So when
Yeah,
you look at your budget,
absolutely.
that's not something you've historically really budgeted for. And so
Mhm.
I think when we think about like, well, what is a small business, and we think of, I don't want to say legitimacy, but like places you are in your
Mhm.
business,
Mhm.
and being taken seriously as a business oftentimes has to do with your risk profile and your expenditure profile,
Sure.
right? And
Mhm.
so and it's not to say that you can't operate completely a successful business out of your garage or your barn or your whatever entirely. I mean, it's
Mhm.
a fantastic strategy if you can do that effectively, but obviously there's challenges with that. If you want to hire people, you don't want them in your house a lot of time and stuff like that. So we typically think
Yeah.
that level of growth is going to require a dedicated space and all that stuff. And that feels really daunting, right? Because
Yeah.
even a starter space. So I'll just give you guys a
Mhm.
real, I'll share numbers because I think that it's helpful. I know talking finances is taboo and stuff sometimes, but just to give you guys a sense of it, when we went from the garage to a shop, like we're still in a small shop space, what I consider
Mhm.
it's less than 1,700 square feet. Just it was a metal building, a single roll up door, like a tiny little 10 by 15 office space. None of it conditioned, none of that
Mhm.
stuff and all that. And I was lucky enough at the time we were paying $900, $950 a month, which is
Okay.
it was something like 70 cents a square foot, which is a
Oh,
smoking
wow.
a smoking deal for
Sure.
around here. Like, because everything else
Yeah.
I was looking at was a buck or a buck 15 a square foot, just to give you a sense.
Wow.
Now, where you are, obviously, cost of rent is different. Wherever other people
Mhm.
are in the world, it's going to be more expensive, less expensive. But
Yeah.
at the very minimum, we're talking about that's $1,000. Let's just call it $1,000 rent expense that I did not have before. Okay.
Yep.
Our average PG&E bill is somewhere
Hmm.
between $700 and $800 right now. We have an incredible. We pay a lot for power. It sucks. Don't get me started
Oof.
on it. Okay.
Yeah.
That I mean, my electric
Sure.
bill was higher here when we were operating here, but not nearly to that extent.
Sure.
Um, what else? So insurance is a huge piece of it, right? Because
Yeah.
you need
Hmm.
insurance. Insure everything in there. It's not going to be covered by your homeowners or your renters insurance. So your business stuff might not be. You need to do
Yeah.
research on that. But let's just say our monthly operating expense went. Originally I would say it started like I'm just going to talk like baseline. Let's say it was something like
Sure.
5,000 is just like me, bootstrapping, and then now I just crunched numbers, recently, guys, and I
Hmm.
again, look, I'm just gonna say it. Where our monthly operating expense that I calced out last
Hmm.
year was 18,000. If we're not making at least $18,000 a month, just to
Oh
give you a
wow.
sense of
Hmm.
it, which is
Yeah.
funny because to big business that's nothing,
That's
right?
nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all
Yeah.
relative. But in
Yep.
terms of if you're thinking about your personal finances, just for our little operation, making our
Yep.
our boxes and our other stuff, that's everything. If we weren't pulling in 18,000, that we were not breaking even. That's payroll. That's basically everything but cost of goods sold. So any,
Sure.
not including buying inventory, not including work in progress. You can think of
Yep.
it as if you had to shut down production,
Yep.
for the most part, but your employees say like a move. Like if we were trying to move
Hmm.
and we were gonna be offline for a month to move, I would still
Sure.
have those costs that I would have to pay.
Hmm.
Right. Maybe
Yeah.
it'd be a little bit lower because maybe our electricity wouldn't be as high and stuff like
Sure.
that. Right.
Sure.
But
But
you get the
that's small,
general.
small rocks.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's arguments to be made in terms of like what we put toward marketing and advertising expense and stuff like that. So there's stuff that you could cut, but
Hmm.
and that's an average. That's an average monthly expense. It's a lot higher in quarter 4 for us. It's leaner
Sure.
typically in the summer months. This year though, we're up uh somewhere between 20 and 30% on a lot of our expenses. So we're in the
Oh
20,000 a
wow.
month. And that gets really scary if you think about that. If you're not drawing in that kind of stuff. So as you grow, it just feels like you're just adding zeros to everything.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's for revenue on about, we don't have this year's numbers, but that's for revenue of about 3/4 mil. Let's just say for
Hmm.
round numbers. So if you're listening back and stuff, and just give you a sense, and some people might think
Hmm.
that's terrible, and others will be like, yeah, that's actually pretty lean. I don't know. I'm constantly looking for that information because
Sure.
we're curious to know how we stack up. You operate a little bit leaner, but you're obviously still
Mm.
in your
Yeah.
space and and so
Well, yeah, yeah.
what's
We're like, I can share, some numbers here. Like for us, we are actively looking at trying to move into a facility. Like for those that don't know, we still produce Gloop out of my personal house. We've basically modified the house to run, a chemical manufacturing plant. It sounds incredibly crazy, but that's what we've done. And looking at moving to a new space, it's going from zero rent, zero anything because I own this house to $1,000, $2,000 a month, whatever it might be, wherever we're going to end up being. And it's that's a huge step for us. When we started Gloop, our first year in business, we did around $113,000. Just in total. If we weren't making around $6,000 a month, we weren't breaking even. That's kind of how it was, how it was worked out. And now, like, business has grown, business is more than, doubled, almost tripled, but with that has come all of the new costs to everything else with it. This is exactly a pit. It's like, how do we go from where we are now to being able to support all of this new infrastructure that we're going to eventually have to bring online? And I think your point of figuring out the revenue that, or the your general burn rate,
yeah.
is so critical, because when we move to a new facility, we will have to spin down this facility
Yep.
and then spin up our second facility.
Yep.
Now, equipment that we've invested in, our reaction vessels and our production equipment, that's not something that we can just go and buy a second one of and put it in a new facility. We will physically have to take it offline
Right.
for several weeks
Right.
as we make the transition. And we're talking, like we've got probably $100,000 worth of very specialized equipment that we have got to move. And if we break it, that is just going to delay everything even further.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. And so let people know what area you live in. I think there was some
Yeah, yeah. So
incorrect
so we're
assumptions
based
about where
here in
you are.
Illinois, right
Okay.
across the river from St. Louis.
Yeah, yeah.
About 20 miles, away from St. Louis. So in the Midwest, the cost of living is fairly cheap. Space we can get fairly cheap, but with us, we run into really interesting predicament. We have we're a chemical manufacturing company. And we have to have EPA, or we have to follow EPA regulations. We have to have variances. So we have a very limited number of spaces we can go to.
Right. Right.
Thankfully, I was able to get some of these variances for where I live, because we're a small business, and worked with the municipality and got the economic development committee to say, okay, yeah, let's rubber stamp this project, because hey, if we can keep them and we can grow a business here, it's good for our economy. But moving to a place where we're going to have to do a significant amount of retrofit for our production, it doesn't make sense for us to potentially lease a space to then be locked into that space if we want to ever grow or move. And so we're having the
Mhm.
conversations. Does it make more sense to actually buy a facility and
Yeah.
have that renovated for our application, or does it make sense to just lease something short term and then while we work on that new facility?
Right.
It's a complicated, it's a complicated situation, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
And what's good for one is not necessarily good for others, and not everybody has,
Hmm.
the ability to either, get a loan to do that, or to just outright buy
Hmm.
it straight out.
Yeah.
I certainly would love. I think a lot of companies would love to have that option, but we get wrapped up a lot of times, especially with these pits in front of us, in trying to uh get too much too fast sometimes. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't feel like I've ever just been kind of keeping as much in the coffers for like specific, things like this, because we're just constantly trying to, like, well, we need to add new product, we need to do more R&D, we need to
Yep.
add more inventory and stuff like that. And so there's a ton of value in just trying to force yourself to sit down and strategize. We've talked about this plenty of times, right? It's just like you
Hmm.
got to stop, you got to look back. I say this more to remind myself, than anything, because I'm terrible at it as well. It's so
Hmm.
easy to get wrapped up in the rat race. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, it's there's a lot of interesting choices to make. Chris in the chat is saying he's house hunting in Northern California. Hey, welcome. Come up and say hi. His wife is looking at rooms and kitchens, and he's looking at locations and places where he can get, outbuildings or garages and stuff
Nice.
like that, which
Hmm.
is awesome. I started there, like, before I was here, I was on like 5 acres, and we had, I had a little, outbuilding that, was my office space, and, plenty of option to build and stuff like that. Um, and depending on what your business is, that can be
Hmm.
a great option. I've seen a ton of very successful businesses legally run out of outbuildings. When you're out in
Yep.
agricultural space, you have a lot more leeway a lot of times. It depends on the
Hmm.
zoning of where you are and what you're allowed to do, and all that stuff. And you might feel comfortable about hiring some help to come out there because it's not in your house, so there's
Hmm.
definitely options for that. Now, what that means for insurance and other stuff is different, and it all comes down to what your goals are. Like, if you want to be able to operate in that capacity, and that's all you
Hmm.
need, that's great. If you think that you may grow beyond that at some point, and we never really
Yeah.
know, I think
Sure.
especially that one of the other hallmarks of what we do is that we're testing the waters, a lot of the time, and
Hmm.
we're just kind of trying to now, is this product even viable, and
Yep.
and and is this product viable at scale, is another great question, because I think that we find these great little niches that we can operate in,
Hmm.
and for a time it may do well, because there might not be competition, or there's
Yep.
all this stuff, but um is this could this scale to $1 million, a $10 million business, a $100 million business? I don't know.
Hmm.
I think it just depends on what it is we're talking about. A lot of times the way that people get there is by diversifying, having more than one product, having other stuff.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
going beyond that bespoke Etsy shop,
Yep.
to something else. So you just have to sit down and have this. And there's it doesn't mean you're committed to it. You can always sell a place. I think rolling real estate into a business, if you can do that, is never a bad
Hmm.
strategy. Because as I said, at the end of the day, if you decide you're going to wrap it all up and be done, you've at least got the building or the house or whatever that you
Yep.
can hopefully sell. Now, who knows? Obviously, rental
Yeah.
markets and real
Yeah. Who
estate
knows?
markets are different things. But if given
Yep.
enough time, in general, the trend is that it's a worthwhile investment as opposed to just sinking money into rent
Sure.
or um, blowing
Yep.
it on nice cars or whatever else. So, yeah. So maybe that's another good example of the pit.
Hmm.
I don't know. Another one I thought of is like maybe employees and hiring and that type
Ah.
of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Where going from
Yeah.
just you to feeling because a lot of times these pits to me come down to commitment.
Sure.
It's like a commitment inflection point, right? I'm gonna commit to this 2-year lease. I'm gonna
Hmm.
commit to some extent. I
Yep.
mean, again, you can break leases.
Yeah.
There's other things that you don't want to have to
Sure.
do, but it's not the end of the world. But you're more stressed out a lot of times about the commitment of these
Hmm.
agreements. When you're
That's exactly
hiring,
it.
you feel well, I don't know, unless you're some I'm not going to judge, but I am kind of unless you become some kind of sociopath. It's like you hire people like you care to the extent where it's like you don't want to hire somebody and then feel like, well, if we don't do well, I'm just going to fire you in a month. Like I mean,
Well,
you
yeah,
can
you
have
get to know that person,
contractors.
and
Yeah. You feel like you are providing
yeah,
for their livelihood, right?
yeah,
And committing to somebody in that like feels massive, right? You don't
yeah,
always know what you're going to get, and so that's another great example of growth. Divides, and then going from
sure.
like one person to 5 people to 10 people to 100 people, and um, the efficiencies that can create and
Hmm.
destroy and all that stuff. Um,
Sure.
and we're in a little bit of different
Yeah.
places in there too. That's a good difference
y-
between us.
Yeah, yeah, we're like right now, we're still basically two people. And we're looking at actually pulling the trigger to bring on a third person. But it's one of those things where, for one, like we know that there's a lot of things that we've got to do in order to actually make that happen. I don't know if I want to bring in employees to my house. But also at the same time, having, now knowing that it's like, okay, well, we need, $6,000 or $8,000 a month, in order to, break even.
Right.
If we bring on another employee, now it's going to add another $2,000 or $3,000 to that,
Right.
in the cost of their, their benefits, their compensation, and all of the necessary insurances that we might need. It adds to that, and it's like, can we actually make that commitment? Because there have been months in the past where we've had terrible sales, and we
Mm-hmm.
saw
Mm-hmm.
where we lost money 2 or 3 months in a row. And had we not planned for these things, we could have easily just said, "Oh, that's it. We don't have money to operate."
Right.
Um, and so yeah, it's absolutely a pit.
So what's interesting about this, like I said, the pit feel to me is
Hmm.
commitment. And so you could draw analogies, metaphors in personal life, and but that
Hmm.
level because you're feeling like you're making these gambles. You're constantly feeling like you're having to reinvest. You're committing to taking the leap. We talk about you hear the term like, oh, I want to take the leap into starting my own business, right? Which is very
Hmm.
much it's not like I had a paycheck for a period I could
Yep.
count on. Now I have uncertainty, right? So it's that movement into
Yeah.
I don't know. And as you're growing your business, you're confronted with it's never just one leap. It's a series
Hmm.
of leaps, right?
Yes.
It's almost like like you're leaping off the high dive into the pool and then getting out of the pool and then leaping into like off of a
Yeah,
larger
into another one.
into
Yeah,
another
that's
one
that's somehow higher than
that's
the first one
higher.
sometimes.
And yeah, and if you miscalculate, it's just that
Yeah.
much more perilous. um,
So I had a mentor that said, it's like every move that you make in business is just literally it's an opportunity to fail at a higher level, right? And it's like each one of these things that you're trying to cross, it's like, okay, well, here's another opportunity for this to, fall further
oh
down than where
yeah,
you were
yeah.
before.
The bigger they are, the harder
you
they
know.
fall. It's a saying for a reason. I mean, but because here's the
Yeah.
thing, you're confronted so we're gonna get into mitigating some of this anxiety and
Hmm.
whatnot. Not again, disclaimer as always, we don't claim to have it all figured out, but we've had some tactics in all of this. But um, you know, the leap. I'm trying to think of how. Let me reframe. I derailed a little bit because I was thinking too many things at once. But gosh, so the mitigation strategy. Where was I going with this? Let's just move on. Let's talk about
Sure.
mitigating and stuff. So I know what I was going to say.
Okay.
The commitment piece, right? We feel like as a business owner, we're committing to a larger purchase. So in the case of purchasing inventory, a lot of times like strategies for getting better pricing. You can negotiate what's called like a blanket purchase a lot of times, where you may not necessarily have to upfront drop $100,000, but if I say over the course of
Sure.
next year, I
Yep.
promise you, based on my forecasting from what we've spent, I will spend $100,000 with you if you agree to give me this pricing and we can split the shipment up. I've done that a number of times and
Hmm.
it's worked out well. But
Hmm.
at the same time, it feels like nobody's committing to us that we're going to have that amount of sales to drive that
Hmm.
demand and all that stuff. So it's that gap between what you feel like you're committing to and what is committed to you. And so
Yes.
there's strategies like when you get into wholesale where you can offer the same thing to your
Yeah.
wholesalers, where you want them to sign the contract and say, look, I will give you this
Exactly.
wholesale rate. And then I
Yeah.
can take that to the bank and say, look, not only do I
Hmm.
have a PO, I have a
Yeah.
contract that agrees that they are going to issue this amount and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And that is much more valuable. So that is a technique, that is a
Hmm.
mitigating thing to try to um, hedge that divide between that which you're committing and that which is being committed to you. Is that
Hmm.
a good
And
way to phrase it? I don't. Yeah. What do you think?
it absolutely is because that's literally exactly what we do here. We started back earlier this year implementing contracts with our resellers saying,
Right.
"Hey, listen, we've got to keep our production lines running. We know now we've been in business for about 4 years. We know the costs associated with that. We can start breaking that down and doing some business intelligence internally, and then we can say, okay, listen, we're going to give you these discounts, but we need you to commit to a minimum purchase. If you're not going to commit to that minimum purchase, then your price per bottle is going to go up to these things.
Right.
We can kind of use an equation, and that really helps smooth out these peaks and valleys when in coming in our revenue, and we can actually plan to that, and we can say, okay, well, we know that if we come to a pit, we have this amount of runway, or we have this length of
Mm-hmm.
a ladder that we can
Mm-hmm.
stretch over that pit.
Right.
And yes, it might be precarious walking over it, but we can get over it over time. um
Right.
that's literally one of the best, I think, ways to do it. And then the other piece is like, for us, we plan everything. So we had we launched 3D Gloop with these metal closures. I've talked about this before. The metal closures were terrible. They
Right.
never worked.
Right.
But what we figured out is like, okay, well, we had to design our own closures, and it was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to get the mold made and to
Right.
actually get the injection, the parts injection molded, and then to us. And that was a pit. It's like, okay, well, we're going to commit to thousands of dollars for mold, and if we get it wrong, then we just wasted all of that money, all of that time, all of that effort. But if we get it right, then we can start, really ramping up and everything else. And so
Right.
for us, it was all about planning, figuring out, okay, we know this pit is coming because at some point we've got to solve this problem. It's
Right.
ahead of us to
That
a balance.
Well, all about balance. You pay your quarter, you get
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
carousel, you go round, up and down with the flow. I talk about all the time. It's all about balance. It's all energy, keeping it real.
yeah.
Have you come across this where hey, maybe we should put a little bit aside here for
Oh, absolutely.
something
So
else?
so at any moment, right? Things, regulations can change. We could, things just in general can change for us, and we're gonna have to pivot. Like maybe for instance, like
Hmm.
this stressed us a bit. During the pandemic, getting some of the reagents became incredibly difficult. Like we were
Supply,
able to,
yeah.
but it was hard. And we had to start looking. It's like, okay, well, what happens if we can no longer make our products the way that we do? And so that's where we as a company, we spend a lot of money, probably well more than we should, in R&D.
Yeah.
We're a chemical manufacturer that spends half of our revenue in R&D. Quite literally, it's like half of our revenue. And it's about trying to figure out what's next, what we're working on, what's going to be after these products, and hopefully, generating more revenue from those. Like, we have new products that we've been working on for years, that we've also, it's like one of those things where it's like we haven't been able to cross the pit of being able to bring these products online because we need another
Mhm.
reaction vessel, we need another, facility, or larger space or whatever to help actually do that.
Right.
But at the same time, we know that we can't just be committed to our 3 or 5 products that we have and call it good. Like, we've done incredible things with the products that we've had so far. Like, we've
Hmm.
built this business up, and it's been running and profitable for 4 years now off of the limited product offerings that we have.
Hmm.
But at some point, we're going to reach a saturation, or at some point, these aren't going to sell as much anymore, and we're going to have to pivot,
That's right.
or we're going to have to bring on something else.
That's right.
So,
So, that's man. So, there's so many challenges with it. Yeah, that's a great example. Risk mitigation, building confidence, hedging bets. I would say 50% into. Well, I don't know if 50% is the right number. I think that's going to differ for everybody. But
hmm
having a commitment, you know, if you fundamentally break down research and development investment as a tactic
hmm
for risk mitigation, is what it
hmm
is, right? It's like, well,
yeah,
we want to maintain relevancy, we want to improve our products, we want to create new products, right, so that we can
hmm
hedge. um
yeah,
One would argue that you wouldn't think that that's fundamentally a bad thing, but the time
hmm
scale by which that starts to pay off
yeah.
is very long and sometimes non-exist. You're going to hit dead ends. We talked about that last week,
Oh,
where
so many dead
you get
ends.
really caught up in like, I've invested so much in this hand, and it's really hard to fold a big hand that you've
hmm
thrown a bunch of money into. But
Yeah.
I think we kind of alluded to this last week too, and this kind of ties together with our organization piece too. Like, if you take that and you put it in its bin and you put it up on the
Yeah.
shelf, you never
Yeah.
know. It might be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now. You go, that was the missing
Yeah.
piece, and you pull it back out. So it's if you keep going,
Yeah.
it's never really lost,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so using that and framework to not depress yourself when you feel
hmm
that you've failed, but you've been like, you know what, this just needs a pause. I went through this when I was really, really aggressively trying to pursue active dehumidification in the rep box.
Ah, okay.
I invested so many. I tried refrigeration, I tried heating, I tried all this stuff, and yes, it can be done, and yes, there are other products that exist out there and all that stuff, but it was not right for me at that time. Does it mean that I'm giving up on it entirely? No. But I have no
No.
problem putting a pin in it, and that teaching was valuable. Like, there
hmm
was value to that. So, you know, sometime that investment takes longer to pay back, and you're gonna come back and you're gonna be in better space. Sometimes you need to spend that money to learn the lesson that it was not the right course of action, and that has value as
hmm
well, but we don't really ever
Yeah.
give it value for that, right? Because if you
hmm
don't get that experience to learn that lesson, you're never going to know,
Yeah.
what you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think your point is well taken, though. Investing in R&D as a mitigation
hmm
strategy to navigate pits is a really interesting way to frame it.
hmm Yeah.
And it's oftentimes a luxury of some degree and some amount of time and success.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, if things were a little bit different here, like let's say for instance, we had lower margins on our products.
Yep.
We wouldn't be able to, spend what we're spending on constant iteration, constant tweaking of the formulas, or constant upgrades, or looking towards that next thing.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen.
Right.
Had things changed slightly differently earlier on. Again, we probably wouldn't be where we are today.
Hmm.
And I think the important piece is that strategies for mitigating the risks around these pits need to be dynamic too, because like you said,
Yes.
sometimes you don't know the size of the pit, and
No.
when you get to it or you've underestimated it, you've got to figure out how to you climb back out of that pit.
Right.
um
And
like we
some pits have
yeah
sarlaccs in them that are like, not only do you
y-
die if you fall into it, but
yeah
the thing in it that's trying to eat you. Yeah, so you don't
yeah
even know
they
what's
literally eat
in the
you.
pit to begin with either. But yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
couldn't
Well,
resist
yeah,
that.
no, exactly. That's exactly it. Like for there's a couple examples, but I think I'll take the, I talked a lot about our caps. I'll continue on this one. Our caps, we realized about 3 months into it that we had probably chosen the wrong material and the wrong type of dye for the purple caps, and it would leach into the product over time,
Hmm.
and this would
Hmm.
cause some unhappy customers and that
Didn't
sort of
think of
stuff. But
that.
these,
Yeah.
yeah, we
Yeah.
didn't think of that. And
Yeah.
we saw this pit of, okay, we need to get to our own closures and we need to solve this. And so we did, but we got almost all the way there, and then we fell, and then we realized, like, oh well, wait, there's actually a design flaw in this as well. We didn't account for
Right.
some of these other variables. And so now it's like, okay, well, if we need to redo the mold slightly, we're talking around another $6,300 for mold revisions. And then on top of that, the cost of the material change to switch out to more expensive material. Like,
Hmm.
we didn't properly estimate the size of this pit when we got into it.
Right.
And so now it's like, okay, well, how do we get back out of this? How do we continue selling our product and, continuing to do all of this stuff while still trying to figure out how do we solve this problem that we deal with and, move forward.
Yeah,
So,
man, that's a tough one. The unknowns and the size of the pit and
mhm,
what you're dealing with. I can think of it, in the 3D printing space. I think one of the things that we as makers need to watch out for is we want we use that tool often as just the end all be all. Like, well, we can always come
mhm.
up with a printed part. That's what it feels like happens for us. We can always just come up with a
Well,
printed part
when
until we
all
get
you
it
have is a hammer,
machined.
everything becomes a
When
nail,
all you have
right?
is a hammer, everything becomes a nail, right? And we make a lot of assumptions around. Just because he can 3D print it does not mean that it will succeed as a printed part. Like, there are failure
Mhm,
modes and stresses of the parts that oftentimes we don't, you know, just
mhm.
because I can take it from CAD to physical
Yeah.
product doesn't mean it's great. One of the things in mind that we're working on currently is there's an end stop sensor on the CR30 that it's just an optical trigger so that when it hits. But we're coming up with
Okay.
a kit for the Y rail, replacing the rollers with linear rail. And in order to do that, we have to move that end stop part. That's just the probe that basically breaks the optical sensor to say when the y-axis is zeroed.
Mhm.
And
Sure.
so of course we go, well, on the machine itself, it's just this metal L bracket, but it wasn't an ideal thing to be able to reuse based on the geometries of what we were dealing with. And so we're like, well, we'll just create a printed part. But unfortunately, like, even with different materials and stuff like that, we were finding, like, if you bumped it when we printed this thing, because anything could have broken the optical sensor,
Mhm,
it was snapping off too easily. And so it's like,
mhm.
ultimately, like, will it work? Can we try it? So we tried it with different materials and stuff like that. And we may have something that works for now, but ultimately maybe we'll have it machined. I don't know.
Sure.
So we use, my point is we oftentimes use these tools as a quick and dirty stopgap, and then we allow probably more beta stuff out into the wild than we should, where there's a little
Mhm.
technical debt associated with that, where it may come back to
Yeah.
be future customer service problems or a
Sure.
recall like you had, where it's like, oh, I didn't even account for the fact that
Mhm.
this could be leaching
Yeah.
into my product. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of different considerations when you're worried about the chemistries of stuff. Over time,
Mhm.
we found a lot of parts that are great and strong, like are still susceptible to seem to become brittle, especially thin wall materials and stuff like that. So we don't kind of
Mhm.
consider it might be fine at launch, but 6 months down the line, it's just not holding up
Yep.
the way that we wanted to, right? So long term,
Yep.
and that stuff is tricky because it chips away at your brand perception if you let too much of that
Mhm.
stuff exist out there, you know.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I don't know. Is that the pit of design, the pit of
Yeah, yeah.
rapid implementation of quick to
I
market
think
of
it's
minimum viable
I think
product?
it's
Yes.
I think it's the pit of the MVP.
Yeah.
I think it really is, and then you need to move away, right? This is a perfect example. Like MVP gets you across the pit partially, but then there's so many other pits around you after you've crossed that MVP pit
Right.
that you've got to start figuring out how do you cross all of these. And if you stay with MVP for too long, you're gonna fall into one of those pits right near you because those
Mm.
pits are constantly growing. Things are changing.
Oh, the
Sometimes the pits
pits are
shrink, sometimes they
growing
grow.
like black
Yeah.
holes sucking up everything in its
Yes.
event horizon.
Yeah. And so now it's like,
Mm.
can you accelerate fast enough away from these pits to actually get,
Oh, we're very metaphor
self-sustaining?
heavy on this episode. Yeah, that's a good point, and that's where technical debt comes in too, because it's like
Yep. Yes.
the byproduct of MVP is technical debt. Oftentimes, I don't know if is that a
Yeah.
waste product of MVP. Could you phrase it that way?
Sure. Yeah. You could call it a waste product.
And then what's just this is a bit of a digression, but what's the counterposition of MVP, a mature established product? What do we call that? It's
Yeah.
maximum
Well,
product I don't know.
I think it would be kind of you just call it a mature or a tested product or
Hmm.
something that's just existed
Stable
and it's
release.
very stable. Yeah.
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 It's not to say, because
You know.
I'm never a big, I think as makers, we look at things and we say, like, well, it's never really done. Because if we were ever to go
Yeah.
back, there's probably everything that you've made. If you ask somebody,
Mhm.
that's a maker that made something and you go,
Well,
okay,
I
but
can change this
what are
or
you gonna,
yeah.
and they'll
Yeah.
tell you like 20 things that they would change, right? But
Yeah.
as a business entrepreneur maker, we just strive for stability, and there may be
Yeah.
still incremental improvement. Like we're still making little incremental
Yeah.
improvements to Repbox, but it's pretty
This is a
mature at this
great
point.
topic for
Yeah.
another episode is like reaching product maturity.
Well, let's
And when do you call it okay, this is mature, and how do you then turn on the widget factory and produce that number of widgets over and over and over again without constantly wanting to go back and change it, right? Becoming that creeping elegance, if you will.
perfect. I agree. So let's put that in the bucket for
Yeah.
next time. I think that puts us at a good stopping point for today. If you stuck with us this long, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for subscribing, liking. Like I said,
Yeah.
please, if you're listening back later and you want to join us on the live stream, we do that every Friday 9 a.m. on YouTube. We love having your comments. Always have the option to call in as well if that's something you guys are interested in joining the conversation physically. We welcome that as well. But until then, thank you so much for joining our conversation. I hope you found some good nuggets in this. And if there's one takeaway that I would leave you with, it's like I said, keep getting those data points, keep marching forward, and realize that these pits are navigable, and
Hmm.
you will get past them. But it is completely normal to encounter them and to have your moments of feeling like you've fallen into the pit or you're never going to get to cross this pit and stuff. It's all about giving it space, breathing. Sometimes it requires sleeping on it a number of times, but you will get past it. And it is
Yes.
something that everybody encounters, whether you're a startup or a multi-million-dollar, business. It's just part of the journey, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Really good chat, Andrew. Always a pleasure,
Yes.
and I look forward to another one next week. Guys,
All
until then,
right.
everybody enjoy your weekend, and we will catch you on the next Maker That Money podcast. Till then, Pooch from Repkord and Andrew.
Andrew from Gloop.